What is up, Flutter devs? Today we're going to figure out how to draw a circle as we port processing to Flutter. Let's get started. Here's the spec for drawing a circle in processing. There is a circle function or procedure, which given an X value, a Y value, and I think that's the diameter in this case, it will draw a circle in the available space. Notice that by default, the fill color is white, and there is also a stroke of black applied. I would guess that's a 1 pixel width stroke. We're going to assume that until I find some evidence to the contrary. But this is what we want to achieve. As with the other things that we've implemented, we want to write a test that literally reproduces this 100 by 100 visual right here. We literally want to draw this circle and make sure it looks the way it looks here in this example. In this case, let's see if we can write our test first and then go write our source code. For the test, initially I'm going to place it in this core test file. Now this test is really not a core test. We're beginning to get into a groove where it's not about the core API anymore. It's about adding the various features. And so it's time for us to reevaluate the test structure. But I'd like to implement this first and then reevaluate the test structure. Here in our tests, let's go to the end and add this test at the bottom because this is the most non-core test, the most specific test so far. I think I pasted that too early. Actually, no, that should have been fine. Okay. This will be a test to draw a circle. We don't care about setup. We would like to be able to call a function called circle. Now, we are going to make a deviation from the way that the processing API works. The processing API has 3 number-based parameters. I'm generally opposed to that way of doing things because unless you remember exactly what those things mean, you have to go look it up, and that's annoying. It's also the case, so the point there is that we want named parameters. The second point is that Flutter offers us all sorts of great fundamental types. Offset, point, size, rect, you name it. I'd rather that we use an offset for an offset than an X and Y value. So here's how we should ideally invoke this method. Center, pass in an offset. I'll go look that up in a moment. And now normally I would say radius, but in keeping with the existing processing API, again, what we're doing here is on behalf of people who already use processing or teachers who already teach processing. Where possible, I want to stick to the way processing does things as long as it doesn't really hurt the usability of the code. Making it diameter is unusual for us in the Flutter world, but it doesn't hurt anybody to have a parameter that's diameter instead of radius. As for the numbers, I said we literally want this circle. So 5646 is the offset. 5646. And then the diameter is 55. We want this code to be able to compile, and we want it to generate a screenshot test that looks just like the one that's in the processing specification. Let's go figure out how to implement this. So I'll save the test. Let me also name the file here. Eventually, I think we're going to want to call this shape 2D primitive circle. Let me show you why I gave it that name. Here's the specification. Here's the shape header. Here's the subheader. Here's the circle function. So I'm capturing the category and the subcategory and then circle. And to make it to match a little better, I'll go plural as well, 2D primitives. And this is also why we need to start looking at dividing up these tests so that we can track the different things that we're implementing, because we're going to implement so many functions and capabilities. Anyway, our goal is now to implement the circle function. We'll come back to the core file, the core implementation. We already have background. Background is kind of like our template here. This is how we want to do things. Let's copy background, paste. We'll call it circle. We will require an offset called center, and we will require a double called diameter. Once again, we will assert that the canvas and size are not null. And you know, now that I think about it, I'd rather that we not repeat this in every single call that we implement. That, I mean, if you have to, you have to, but there's got to be a way around this, right? So let's cut that out of there. And you'll recall that in the last video, we implemented this do setup. Do setup allows us to impose some additional behavior before setup is called. And remember in our painter that we call setup from our painter after canvas and size are set. Therefore, if we assert that canvas and size are set in do setup, then we know that for setup and draw, there is a canvas and there is a size. We accomplish the same goal, but we avoid having to repeat this code endlessly. Let's put the assertion there. Let's take the assertion out of background. Now let's get back to implementing circle. There is a default, we said there's a default paint color, fill color of white, and a default stroke color of black. The way that painting works in Flutter is that we require two paints. Or I guess we could change one paint from one to the other, but in reality, we want two paints. We want one paint for the fill, and we want one paint for the stroke. What we're going to find is that the fill color and the stroke color are used by all these different shape functions: circle, ellipse, line, quad, rectangle. Therefore, we don't want to create a new paint each time we run circle. Instead, in addition to canvas and size, we want to introduce a kind of persistent concept for both of those paints. Paint, fill paint, paint, stroke paint. Now, I believe that much like the background color, these are reset either every time setup is run or every time draw is run. Although maybe that's worth a test. Maybe we should find out for sure. Let's come back here to processing. Here's a circle. Obviously, by default, it paints white. The question is, if we change the fill color, will it be reset? Let me come up here to the top and define a variable. Did initial fill. And I guess we'll declare that as a Boolean. Did initial fill equals true. If did initial fill, I should say if not, then, so what am I trying to do here? Essentially, I want the first run to use the default fill. Then I want to switch the fill color one time and one time only and see if the fill color goes back to the default. So I think I want to draw the white circle, and then if we have not switched the paint yet, I want to set the fill. Let's switch it to red. and then did initial fill equals true. The very first circle is going to be white by default. We know that. Then I'm going to change the fill to red. Then we're going to come back into draw and create another circle. The question is, will the second circle be red or will it be white? Let's see. Red. Here's what this tells us. Once we change the fill color, every time draw is called after this, that fill color is remembered. My guess is setup initially sets it to white, and then any point after that, it stays red. Let me do one more test. Instead of changing it here, I believe if we make it red here, all the circles will always be red. And that's true. Essentially, what this means is that we want to set the fill and stroke color to their defaults before the setup function is called, and then we don't touch it again. Here is yet another use of do setup. We used it to fill the default background color. Now we're going to use it to set the default paint colors. Here in setup, by default, the fill color is white and the stroke is 1 pixel black. Therefore, fill paint equals a new paint whose color is, well, let's see if I can avoid importing material just for this. That's white. And the type, or the style, is painting style fill, which I don't think we need, but just to be clear, that's what it is. And then stroke paint is black, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and this style is painting style stroke, and the stroke width is equal to 1. At the beginning of setup, before the user's setup even runs, we're going to configure the default, and then down in circle, we want to use these two paints to paint our circle. We will say canvas, draw circle. At the center, the radius is diameter divided by 2, and we're going to use the fill paint. Then we're going to do it again with the stroke paint. All right. If we go back to the test, notice that it compiles because we have now fulfilled the contract exactly how we want it to work. We should be able to run the draw a circle test, generate a golden, and that golden should look just like this. Let's go see. Let's say Flutter test plain name equals draw a circle, update goldens, test, core test. All right. Open up the new file, and there it is. Now this says it's showing, oh, sorry, there's the actual size. There's the actual size. So let's take that. I'd say those are close enough for me. I mean, they may not be exact, especially given that the anti-aliasing algorithms are almost certainly different. We're never going to truly be exact, but I think we've essentially replicated what we were going for. Just like that, we have support for a circle. Now let's talk about these tests for a moment. Again, there are these different categories and subcategories. And I think that I'd like to at least try representing those as different directories in under test and see how that goes. Maybe it'll be cumbersome, maybe not, but let's see how that works for us. Let's come into test. Let's have a new package called shape, and within shape, we will have 2D primitives. Create a new Dart file, 2D. Let's see, do we want a file per shape? A file per shape sounds like overkill. But to have all the shapes in one, that might be a bit. Well, let's start with the simpler way. So instead of having the 2D primitives directory, let's make 2D primitives a file. And I don't know in the IDE how to actually, it's collapsed those down. Let's see what happens there. Okay, deleted both the directories. Let's try this again. Shape. 2D primitives test. We'll go to core test. I will copy everything in here, paste it, and then I will delete everything but this last test. And test infra is now up a directory, update that import. And these are 2D primitives. And we can now just call it circle because now this is fully descriptive. Given the 2D primitives subcategory, we know what it means to test the circle command. But actually, we want another group around this, I think, which is shape. I'm not entirely sure how the test runner will or won't collapse the group. Like eventually, we're going to have another test file called curves, and that's also going to be in the shape group, but it's going to be in a different file. Will those groups be combined? I don't know. I haven't tested that yet, but ideally they would be. Now I'm going to delete the file from this Goldens directory because I believe that the Golden toolkit will generate the Goldens at the same within the same directory as the test file. So let's do Flutter test plain name equals circle, update Goldens, and this time we're going to target 2D primitives. Yeah, here's another Goldens file, and now we're back. It's also the case that this background command, which we already support, is under color setting. Why don't we go ahead and move that out as well? Now we don't want the draw a circle test here. And we don't want the default, like even though the default background, technically we've used the background command under the hood, it's not actually part of the specification for the background command. So we're going to delete that one too. And we're going to update our import. And we're going to change the top group to color. We're going to create another group, which is setting. And let's rename these files. This is color setting. And let's see, how do we want to name these? Because what we are doing here is we're replicating this first example and then this second example, and eventually we will replicate the third example. I'm thinking that maybe just a number for each of these, or maybe example 1, example 2, when we're actually representing these examples. I think that's what I'm going to go with. But now this first one is specifically about setup. This isn't an example. This is us referring to a specific use case. Here, I think we'll do color setting background in setup. This will be the naming strategy here. User can paint background in draw. This one is really the first example. This is background example 1. I'm going to replace this with background example 1. And this is background example 2. Background in draw replaces background in setup. Background, setup, and draw. Now, from a readability standpoint, when someone comes in here to read these tests, the first thing they probably want to see are the examples, not the special use cases. Let's take this top test, which is a use case. Let's cut it. Now the first thing is example 1. The second thing is example 2. We haven't implemented example 3 yet, and we won't for a while. After example 2, we'll paste that test. Let's save. I am now going to delete all of the background command files from the core Goldens. Now we're operating in this color directory here. I'm going to say Flutter test update Goldens test color setting test. We have a new Goldens directory. Here's example 1. I think, did I forget to change the name for example 2? Yes, I did. This file here should be example 2, not example 1. Let's run it again. Okay. Example 1 is the gray box. Example 2 is the orange box. Same thing that we see here. Then we have this special use case 1, special use case 2. All of those are exactly what we expect. Now, based on the naming convention that I just mentioned, this file here should actually be example 1. There's only one example, but that's what it should be. Let's delete the existing file because we changed the name. And let's also rename this one to example 1. As you can see, I'm kind of changing my decisions as I go, as I'm seeing more of what those decisions mean. By explicitly saying example in the title, this naming convention should work for all the commands as opposed to just having circle here. Anyways, we regenerate that file. And here we are. Looks good to me. Let's revisit the core stuff. What do we have left over here in core? Core test. Well, draw a circle should no longer be here at all. In fact, most of these shouldn't be here. Only the default, this first one that paints the default color, that should be here because that is a core behavioral test that's independent of any particular command. Let's also, again, as a change to naming conventions, we'll separate major segments of names with an underscore, but then continuous statements like setup paints default background, we'll use dashes. Let's save. Close these. This name is changed, so I will delete this file. And I will say Flutter test update Goldens test core test. And by the way, if you change names and replace the files, make sure that your tests pass before you replace the files. Otherwise, you might break a test, replace it, and then your replacement is broken. But here we are with the replacement, and now I think that we are good. Although there is, I think, one last change I want to make is that having the core file in Golden's interleaved with shape and color, I'm not a fan of that. It's hard to track them. Let's just go ahead and create a directory called core. And I'll take Golden's and core test. I'll drag them into core. Then I'll update. Actually, the import already updated. That's good. Now all of the tests should pass. Flutter test. If I say Flutter test, it's automatically going to use the test directory, and it's going to test all the tests in the test directory. All tests pass. Great. We're now breaking up, we have broken up our tests into multiple directories. This gives us some testing structure moving forward. At some point, we'll want to make a similar change to our source code inside of core. We're not quite there yet. I think we can do a few more things before we start worrying about how to decompose that, but eventually we will there as well. But in today's video, we have added and implemented the drawing of a circle given an offset and a diameter. And in the next video, we'll pick yet another command.